Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher and thank you for joining me for the next hour as I discuss with Captain Gerry Gouveia, Chairman of the Private Sector Commission, topical issues confronting our country, some of them positive, some of them perhaps not so positive. Just before we came on the air, there was a power interruption, popularly known as blackout, caused by the national provider, the Guyana Power and Light. So I thought we'd probably start on that question, Captain Gouveia, as I welcome you to Plain Talk. What's going on at Guyana Power and Light? They're not saying very much.
Well, we actually do have a private sector rep that sits on the board in the person of Kumar Ramnath.
Yes.
And so he basically is the private sector representative on that board. He's been there for close to maybe 5 or 6 years now or more. And it seems to be a real challenge for us. You know, power is one of the things that affects our competitiveness. It affects our manufacturing. It certainly affects the cost of production. And we're actually quite surprised in the private sector. And we've been talking to Kumar Ramnath to give us a feedback all the time of what in fact is happening with the reliability of the power supply. And it is of extreme concern to us, Chris, that GPL seems to have retrogressed because we know that there are times when we lived through this before, and then we had fixed it. And then, much to your own, because you were one of the persons that was against the Amida Falls, but we believed in the private sector that the Amida Falls would have bring tremendous relief to the supply of power to the country. But I mean, that is a debate that is long past, and now we are looking forward to the natural gas.
Well, natural gas is quite some years away. You
Yes.
know, all the research that is taking place, all the discoveries that have been taking place are focused on petroleum,
Yes.
on fuel. Now, you correctly said I did come out against the financing structure of the Amida Falls.
Yes.
And in fact, I had that as a question. It's not something that I ever run from.
Right.
Now, do you believe this government was correct in abandoning the Amida Falls hydroelectricity project?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I believe that I have been a regular visitor to the Amida Falls. I have been, as a pilot, I've flown over that fall when the water was high, when the water was low. I know that there's also constant supply in terms of, because you have to build a reservoir. And I did see a picture one time where somebody posted that the falls was dry and kind of make it look like if, for example, when that happened, there'll be no.
I think that was in the Kaiser
right?
newspapers.
But the point is, a hydro requires a reservoir, and there are millions and millions and millions and millions of gallons of water that feed that falls and feed the Kaiser Falls. And so yes, I believe then, I believe now that the Amida Falls was one of the good sources of power that we needed, and I think the government was wrong. I think the Amida Falls is still a viable project that need to be looked at, even though, and of course, and I could already tell you what the experts told me is that that certainly natural gas, when it comes, is going to be the best option for us, because the natural gas comes out of the same wells of the oil. And they use a lot of it, of course, to get the pressure of the oil up. But other than that, there's a big surplus of that natural gas that it will bring to shore that will power our electrical supplies.
But you can't just take natural gas. First of all, it's 120 miles offshore.
Yes.
So the infrastructure to bring it. But you can't just take natural gas and put it into the type of diesel-powered system that we have, can you?
No. You have to have the trans. You have to have the trans. Yes.
So you need substantial expenditure.
There will be an investment. There'll be a capital expense to get it done. But when it's done, it will bring down the cost of power, and it will bring down the cost of production. But at the same time, we still need hydropower, we still need solar power, we still need wind power, and I believe we must use power is vital to our cost of production. Whether it's our hotels, whether it's our homes, whether it's the manufacturing sector, it is vitally important that that we take advantage of all of the sources of power that we have in Guyana.
Well, Gerry, look, the lots of places are now installing because it makes good environmental sense, it makes good social sense, it makes good economic sense. People are turning to solar power, and they're trying to partner with the Guyana Power and Light, and the Guyana Power and Light has been incompetent and obstinate.
You know, you're right. I mean, the GPL have to be able to take the surplus power from consumers, from their solar power, from their wind power systems. GPL need to improve and transform their systems. The meters, how the meters, because basically what you do, you give people credit for the power you take.
Yes.
But they are taking long to do that. Actually, I was very pleased to hear GPL is entering into this deal to buy power from the private sector. We actually had one of the private sector stakeholders in Skeldon that brought in a wind power system, fantastic wind power system to power his own hotels, but also was prepared to sell that power to GPL. And that system, that whole transaction took forever. It frustrated the stakeholder, and the stakeholders send the power system back out of Guyana.
And that continues to happen.
It's sad, actually.
We now hear that, we're willing to do this. Do you believe it's because of this crisis that GPL faces in terms of its capacity that it's now saying, we want to partner with the private sector?
There's no doubt that out of this travesty, out of this difficulty that they're facing, that they're now finding the good sense to say we need to do this. But they should have been doing this a long time ago. And particularly with the solar. Now, solar systems, while it's good for, it is not as strong for industrial power. Solar power is something that it is good for particular levels of production. And so hydropower could take you all the way.
Yes.
But solar power can't do that. But still, it is still a supply of power to GPL that they could have been using for many years now.
Because for Georgetown, you're talking lots of residential power.
That's
lots
correct.
of the commercial business and the manufacturing sector generate their own electricity anyway.
Yes. You know what we say in the private sector? We say we don't reward you for effort. We reward you for results. And so when I hear excuses after excuses of why we're not getting results, when you don't get results with our power, when it affects our production, it affects everything else. It affects the ability of our economy to pay better salaries, to create more jobs. And I think GPL really gotta get a lot of help to bring themselves to the level where we could depend on them.
But as you said that the private sector commission actually has a nominee
That's correct.
on the board of the GPL.
That's correct.
Why can't the private sector commission bring its expertise and its advocacy to ensuring the GPL in fact does something that is positive for a change?
You're right. I mean, we have been talking to our rep on the board of GPL. He is very active. He's there with them. And you know.
But you just said you deal with results, not efforts.
That's right. And so we've actually summoned him to come and see us. So I think on Friday we are expected to meet with him. Because the private sector is really with everything that is happening, that is affecting the economy. There's so much that is before us that we really should not have been. We should not have been required to deal with these things, but we have to deal with them. And so we're meeting with him on Friday, and hopefully we'll get some answers, and we'll be able to make some suggestions to him to make to the board.
What kind of consequence is there on the private sector? I know about the domestic sector. The consequence on the private sector of an inefficient generation and production of electricity, generation and distribution of electricity, say.
Chris, when the competitiveness strategy was started back in 2006, when the IDB brought in the consultants and we all sat around in the clusters talking, we were all trying to identify the things that affects Guyana competitiveness. So believe it or not, power was at the top of the list. You had the power, you had a Deepwater Harbor, you had issues of customs, you had the road from Lethem, we needed a new airport, we needed brand name airlines, we need brand name hotels. To move Guyana to the next level, we have identified 141 things that affect Guyana's competitiveness back then. And we started to work on them. So we took 10 and then we took another 10. And on the top of that list was power. It was power because the cost of power, it would cripple our manufacturing sector. Our manufacturing sector cannot be competitive. It makes, first of all, because Ghana is now an open and free society, people will find it cheaper to buy furniture and buy items of production.
Anything.
To import it into Guyana rather than do it here.
Yes.
And so it affects our job creation. It affects the morale of the business. It really is very disastrous for us.
You have been around the private sector, you've been around politicians a lot. Why is it that something that seems to be as glaring as that does not get the attention it requires from the political directorate?
You know, as far as I know, and I believe that we had, over the last maybe 15 years, and particularly with this power situation we have here now, it's a deterioration. We have actually, in my view, had the power, the power was almost fixed. And I remember we used to joke about the fact that blackouts was a thing of the past. And then suddenly it came back. But
so that was a joke.
Yes. Well, in the days when we were talking about that, when you had the water plants running and you had you cannot underestimate maintenance. When you start to mess around with maintenance and believe that you could, if you don't have the technical competence, if you don't have the technical expertise to maintain these generators and to maintain them every single day, this is what we need, reliable power. And you start to mess with the maintenance contracts. Look, my planes, just if you look at Ogle and you go and you look at the maintenance systems of those planes at Ogle, the only thing they're second to is the nuclear industry. Because we cannot afford our planes not to be maintained to the highest standards. And our power systems is exactly the same thing. And so we need not to mess around. You know, let me just make this point to you. You make the point about politicians. The worst kind of leaders we could have is leaders who don't know how things work. Leaders who don't know how things work.
And you're linking that with politicians.
But worse than leaders who don't know how things work is leaders who don't know they don't know. And so they don't take advice because they believe they know everything. And this is a very serious problem we have. So what we need, I'll tell you, I'll identify one minister of this government for you that I took my hat off to. Dominic Gaskin. Dominic Gaskin was a minister that got involved. He became the Minister of Tourism. Dominic Gaskin recognized it was an industry that he did not have the expertise in, and Dominic Gaskin listened to the industry. He knew what he didn't know, and he listened to people. I wish that we had more of our leaders like that.
Are you suggesting then, because I was coming on to the private sector, that the tourism sector is a bright spot in our economy now?
Tourism is absolutely... I want to tell you, today I met with a gentleman who is part of an international marketing program for Guyana. And when I met him, I was delighted that the Guyana Tourism Authority and the new director of tourism in the Guyana Tourism Authority is actually an initiative by Dominic Gaskin. And this is what impresses me with him. And that he knew, and so he brought in an expert. And that expert understood and listened to the industry, listened to us. We have been saying forever that one of the biggest problems facing Guyana tourism is the issue of marketing. And he brought in an international marketing company that is now looking to start developing the marketing strategies for us to penetrate the US market, the Canadian market, and the ecotourism market, and the mountain biking market, and the hiking market, and so on. And I met with him for 2 hours today. And that is something that impressed me. And so yes, our tourism industry, there are $200 billion being spent in tourism across the world.
Across the world.
And 20 billion is being spent on eco and adventure tourism, and we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg yet. Belize and Costa Rica have been in the forefront. Now, I will tell you, 30 years ago, or 25 years ago, actually, in Belize, people used to wear a jersey mark, where's Belize? And at the back mark, who the hell cares? Nobody knew where was Belize. You try to go to Belize today, you can't get a seat.
But tell me something on this question of tourism. Guyana will now be known as a place for fossil fuel exploitation, for the good or the worse.
Yes. But
how is that compatible? How does your marketing consultant, this expert, how do you reconcile the two? Because people are keen on the environment, keen on the carbon footprint. Now, those things are incompatible with fossil fuel extraction. How do you marry the two?
Well, the fundamental mistake you're making there is that you're assuming that the Guyana, 100% of the Guyana tourism market, it is with the fanatical eco and adventure tourists. Guyana have entertainment tourism. We have all kinds of other tourism. We have sports tourism. We have entertainment tourism, cultural tourism, and in fact, Chris, when that super highway would have been built from Latham to the Atlantic coast to Deepwater Harbor, what we would have been doing is opening up Guyana to a massive amount of cultural tourism from the rest of South America, who would be coming to this English-speaking province on the continent of South America to listen to our language, to listen to our Caribbean music, eat our food. And so cultural tourism is going to actually overtake ecotourism as Guyana's main platform. So while ecotourism is important, we have maybe about 10,000 eco-tourists a year coming to Guyana. Ecotourism is important, but it is not more important.
Is not part of the high-value part of the market?
It is high value, but still, look, the guy asked me today, and we spoke about it. If I had $100 million to spend on marketing Guyana, how would I spend that money? So I had three market segments. One would be the bona fide eco-tourism, right? Then we'd have the diaspora, and then we have Caribbean. And it would be 60-40. I will take 60% of that money will go towards the diaspora, getting our Guyanese to come back home, to market to them and understand that Guyana is beautiful and safe today. A lot of them don't know, and they'll come back to Guyana. And then in the Caribbean, and then I will go to the international marketplace, the World Travel Market, the ITB in Germany, and get a segment of that. But I think we need some of our worst ambassadors in our own diaspora in places like in New York and so on. A lot of them, sometimes they believe that they need to make an excuse why they left Guyana. And so they bad about Guyana all the time, without understanding that, okay, fine, so you've left for better education, for better healthcare, for whatever you like, but do not go out there and bad talk your country. And they have been doing that. And so we need to be able to reach to them, reach to the diaspora, and urge them to become our ambassadors, and urge them to come back home and enjoy Guyana. Go to Kaieteur Falls, go to Baganara, go to the Rupununi, and be part of that. And so when we market, we're not only marketing to the eco and adventure tourists, but we gotta go to our friends and families in the diaspora and our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation out there, but these are the very people who left Guyana voluntarily. So it's not that they don't know Guyana. They may have certain biases and prejudices, but that's why they left.
Like I said, I think unfortunately a lot of people are doing this because they're trying to justify why they left Guyana. And I don't think they need to do it. I think they left because they wanted better education, they wanted a better job, that is fine. They don't need to go out there and badmouth Guyana. We are here, we are creating jobs every day, we are working together every day, whether we're the politicians, whether we're the business people, we're the church, the labor union, regardless of our difference of opinion, we are all here in Guyana working every day to make Guyana a better place.
I want to turn now to the business climate. We have had political uncertainty, constitutional crisis. 1 week from today will be a red letter day in terms of our constitutional development or underdevelopment, what is the state in your view, or what is it in terms of in the view of the Private Sector Commission? What is the business climate like currently?
Christian, it's very, very depressing. Very depressing to talk about this because people have basically taken their foot off the accelerator. Business people and investors, we have to know that tomorrow is going to be a better day than
So
today.
who have taken their feet off the accelerator?
We have had international investors walk into the Private Sector Commission and said to us they're waiting to see the results of where this goes. You have had local businessmen, for example, that there are a lot of us, for example. I continue to expand my business. I see the Pegasus is doing it, so there are people who are doing it. But when you're in a situation where the rule of law, where the predictability of stability tomorrow is uncertain, it frightens people. And actually, there's a lot of people that are afraid of tomorrow. They're afraid of what tomorrow will bring. They're afraid of, and I really believe a person like me, for example, who lived through this entire transition from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s and to where we are today. I really thought that we would have left those terrible troubled times behind us. That today in 2019, with what is before us, with 6 billion barrels of oil before us, that could make a difference in every single man, woman, and child's life in Guyana. It's not if you will do well, but it's how well you will do. It's no longer just a promise of the good life. The good life will be there, but we have to work together, Chris. And when I see what is happening day after day here, when we are disobeying the rule of law, disobeying the Constitution, we are not complying with some simple, basic tenets of our Constitution. Just to get on with it, we all want a government that exercise and operate with their full powers. To have a government that is being labeled the caretaker government is actually quite a discouraging label to be put on any government, as far as I'm concerned.
So, let me get you right. You're suggesting that the business climate depresses you as you think about it.
Not the business climate is affected by the political instability and uncertainty.
Because I was coming to that. So,
right.
And you're now saying that is a function and a consequence
Yes.
of the political uncertainty.
Absolutely. Look, investor confidence. Leaders in Guyana have to, every single day they wake up in the morning, they have to be thinking about investor confidence. How do we foster and enhance investor confidence? Because the biggest challenge Guyana faces before this issue now was the issue of creation of jobs for our young people. And not just creation of jobs, but creation of proper paying jobs. Jobs that these young people could enjoy, that they could buy a house, buy a car, they could travel, and they could really live their lives in Guyana here without having to run to Miami or Canada or the Caribbean, that they could do it right here. But our leaders got to be obsessed with the creation of jobs. And the creation of jobs is not done by government. The creation of jobs is done by the government creating the enabling environment to foster and enhance investor confidence. Now, investor confidence is not going to be fostered and enhanced in an environment of political uncertainty like we're living in today, right now.
Well, you talk about it's not a function of the government to provide jobs, but all the evidence is showing that the government has becoming more and more of the significant employer in our society.
That is a mistake. If those are the figures that you are seeing, we are going back in places that is not very healthy. You know, we came from a time when the government controlled 95% of the economy. We came from a point in time when the private sector was almost virtually destroyed. We don't ever want to go back there. We don't want government to dominate the economy. Let the private sector do it. Let the government regulate the private sector. Let the government create that enabling environment, and the private sector will create the jobs. The private sector will be the engine of growth. Regulate the private sector. Government should not be in the business of competing with the private sector. Right now, for example, this is a very disturbing trend. You know, the government spent millions and millions of dollars buying planes for the army. Millions of dollars buying planes for the army. You know what those planes are doing now? Those planes are starting to run commercial competition to the private sector. Could you believe that in 2019? That is infuriating. The fact that these planes are now flying tourists to Kaieteur Falls. I mean, it's crazy. We have pictures with the GDF planes sitting around Kaieteur Falls, flying their tourists like the rest of us. supporting the miners in the hinterland, flying in and competing with the private sector. Those planes were brought into this country to support the Guyana Defence Force in their mission to protect our territorial integrity and to do the tripwire security we need and to do the border patrols and the reconnaissance and supply of our troops, not to be there competing with the private sector. Something is going wrong with the thinking.
Well, you mentioned earlier that the former business minister is one of the bright spots for you.
For me, yes,
of this
yes,
government.
yes. Dominic Gaskin was very good.
And that, of course, is just the opposite of what columnist Freddie Kissoon said today. He said Dominic Gaskin would be one of the worst ministers ever in Ghana. But that's a different issue.
Where you stand depends on where you
Yeah.
sit.
Okay. Well, he is an objective journalist.
Right. And I'm an objective businessman.
Businessman. Good.
Right. That was the subject of Dominic Gaskin behavior in office and his policies.
But you are opposed to the government engaging in any form of activity other than regulatory
No.
in the private.
No, there are
in the
things.
economy?
There are transformational projects. There's transformational that government could get involved in. For example, the issue of transportation, the issue of bridges, the issue of like when you look at the Marriott Hotel, for example, the Marriott Hotel is a transformational project, and whoever doubted the importance of Marriott back 5-10 years ago, will see today. You go to the Marriott, and you figure. Just stop and believe how Guyana would have survived today without the Marriott. With what is happening now, what is before us. If we don't have a Sheraton and a Hilton in the next 4 or 5 years, we are going to be overrun. International branding hotels of that caliber are transformational projects, like the airport. The airport, you go to our airport today, is beautiful. Mind you, it's still a little small, and we'll probably outgrow it in 5 years. But the airport project that the government just completed was amazing. It's a transformational project. The Marriott Hotel, the Berbice Bridge was a transformational project. It transformed the entire Berbice area. Without that, I go to Berbice sometimes 4 or 5 times a year. I never used to go before. I love going to Berbice. We need transformational projects in Linden. We need transformational projects across this country. Mitre Falls is the transformational project. The road from Lethem will be a transformational project. It will transform this country. So it catapults us from one level to the next. And we are so far behind the power curve, Chris, that we need transformational projects to catapult us to the platform where we need to be.
Do you think this government is geared towards transformational projects? You mentioned a number of the projects you mentioned are from the previous government.
And for me, I see it as government. And I'll tell you this: I lived through I lived through the Desmond Hoyt era when Desmond Hoyt started the transformation of this economy in this country, and I saw when the PPP came, and I will tell you, it took the PPP in excess of 5 or 6 or 7 years to get their footings, and so a new government, and especially because of our political system, that kind of when you get into the opposition, you stay there forever. And rather than in Barbados, for example, or in Jamaica, or even in Trinidad, where governments change on a regular basis, and so politicians are not sitting out in the cold forever. So when a government changed and you had people out of government and not even in business for 20 years, and then suddenly they get into government, it takes them a time to ramp up. And I believe even so,
but a responsible opposition party,
yes,
will prepare itself must always be prepared to be the government. It's really the government in waiting, is the shadow government.
I agree. I agree with you, and
to put a country on hold for 4 or 5 years because they need to get their footing for a transformation project.
They came into office, and the whole issue of preparing yourself for leadership, and some people never even run a small business and then suddenly to be running an entire ministry of thousands of people with billions of dollars in that ministry. People need to be trained. They need to be prepared to take on that responsibility. And in fact, somebody talked about meritocracy. So if you follow the Singapore model, where to be a minister, the government have to run the government using the principles of meritocracy, so that people in going into positions of authority have to have the qualifications and the experience to hold those positions, not just because you're a politician or because you're loyal to a particular party, but because you have the expertise. And so meritocracy became a big thing. Integrity and pragmatism was the three things that basically were the foundation of the Singapore model.
You're going into areas that, if we link the natural resources and governance and meritocracy, I want to raise this issue with you and to ask you whether the private sector is concerned about this issue of resource curse. And the term resource curse, the Natural Resources Governance Institute defines it as encompassing the significant social, economic, and political challenges that are unique to countries rich in oil, gas, and mineral. Is Guyana in danger of the resource curse?
I think we have all been talking about it. We understand we know how to prevent this. So we know the roadmap, Chris. And this is not just a job for the government alone. This is a job for the government and the private sector and other stakeholders. And so we need to work together in dealing with this. And the issue is, how do we, while we enjoy the spoils from the oil, how do we give priority to agriculture? How do we give priority to manufacturing? How do we give priority to tourism? Things that are going to sustain itself long after the oil is gone. And in other countries, they've neglected those things. And the whole issue of integrity. I did say the Singapore model have pragmatism, meritocracy, and integrity. Integrity is vitally important, but you cannot just expect people to be their integrity to be natural. So you have to have the Integrity Commission got to work. I'm surprised to hear that our Integrity Commission is not working today, 2019. That we still have public officials that refuse to declare their assets to the Integrity Commission. I am appalled as a citizen of Guyana that my leaders, every single one of them, are not complying with the Integrity Commission requirements. And so to deal with this curse is to insist that we have the kind of oversight and regulatory bodies to prevent these type of things from happening. But if we don't, Chris, and the amount of money that will be flowing into this country in the hands of government, if we don't have the oversight bodies to make sure that human beings are controlled, we are going to be very, very sorry.
Well, interesting, you didn't mention the Natural Resource Institute identifies as the first problem in terms of the resource curse is one of democracy. It says this: natural resource wealth, particularly oil wealth, has made it more likely for governments to become or remain authoritarian over the past 30 years.
Chris, we have been, people keep asking the private sector, why are you involved in the issue of our democracy? Why aren't you just concentrating on business? Well, first of all, the private sector never only concentrates on business. We concentrate on helping to create the enabling environment so that business could flourish. And I will tell you, the issue of democracy, issues of respect for the rule of law, governments are usually very, very powerful entities. And the only thing that corral government is the rule of law and the demand for them to obey the Constitution. And if you have a government that disobeys the rule of law and disregards the rule of law and disregard the provisions of the Constitution, then this becomes a reality.
Well, is that what we're facing now? Following the December 21, the decision by the National Assembly, the decision by the courts, are we facing a threat to democracy and the likelihood for our government to become or remain authoritarian?
We need to get, no citizen of this country should be below the law, and no citizen should be above the law. Every citizen, including the president, including the ministers, including the opposition leader, including the private sector, we must all be equal in the face of the law, and the government must be answerable to the law. And for me, from where I sit, I'm very uncomfortable with where we are today, 8 months, 9 months down the road, and the provisions of the Constitution is, there are all kinds of maneuvering and tactics and strategies. And now these tactics and strategies have moved from the Constitution to GCOM. It frightens me. It frightens me as a businessman. I employ 300 people today. In the private sector today, we have thousands of companies and thousands of people that depend on the rule of law. You know why, Chris? Because if a government wakes up tomorrow and decide we are going to seize GBTI Bank, and they are not corralled by the rule of law and the Constitution, I mean, it's a dangerous thing. We really have to, as a people, not necessarily pick political sides, because it's not about political sides. This is about demanding that every one of us obey the rule of law and the Constitution.
And I come back to this question of democracy.
Yes.
The second issue the Natural Resource Governance Institute speaks to is this question of conflict. It says natural resources can and often do provoke and sustain internal conflicts as different groups fight for control of the resources or use natural resources to finance their fighting.
I hear that, and it's so disappointing. It's so, if we ourselves, we sometimes are our worst enemies. If you just look, for example, at the division between the PNC and the PPP, you ask, how did that happen? The colonial masters came to Guyana and divided our people. And when I see that division live for 50 years after independence, and we can't fix it, Chris, the PPP and the PNC used to be together. Indian people and black people work together to overcome. Let me just finish. And so the point is, we know this was done to us. We know they divided us, and all of these years we didn't fix it. Now we know that this is coming. We know that this is coming again. And if we just sit down and allow it to happen,
is this moment I'm talking about?
But we need to fix it now.
What is the role? Well, it goes on to identify inefficient spending and borrowing as another consequence, as one of the components. It talks of the Dutch disease, a large increase in natural resource revenues hurting other sectors of the economy, particularly export-based manufacturing and agriculture, by causing inflation or exchange rate fluctuation. And guess some of the countries they mention. The detrimental effect of natural resources on other industries has been well documented in Iran, Russia, Venezuela, and Trinidad and Tobago.
It's sad.
Are we learning these lessons?
I hope so. But
how do you get? You're a key member of our society.
No, I hear you.
You have access. You meet politicians. You meet everybody. People have to listen to you. They have to give you access.
You know what we need, Chris? You see, you are a treasure. And don't answer me, Chris.
No,
you
please.
are a treasure. No.
Well,
you are a treasure to Guyana. People like you. I'm very serious, because we need strong advocates for the rule of law. We need strong advocates for democracy and human rights. And we need people like you, a lot of people like you, to keep doing what you're doing. So while the rest of us are sometimes miss these things, Chris, you have been in the forefront of the fight for democracy and the rule of law and compliance and accountability. And I value your input amazing. Your input has been amazing.
Well, even if that were so, one person is just a voice. The voice can often be lost in the clang and of arms and
one day some people might like you, and then another day the same people don't like you.
That's all right. I'm accustomed to that.
Right.
But Gerry, what then? We talk, and partly around the subject, and it's good that we can articulate all the nuances in a situation. Come 1 week from now, by midnight on the 18th, I think I heard the court say it's a drop dead date. Because 93 months will have passed since the Caribbean Court of Justice handed down its decision saying that the words of the Constitution are clear, they need no gloss, Cabinet resigns, the government is essentially just in a lame duck mode, preparing for elections. These things are not happening.
And
Why do we have to go to court? Why do we have to go to court to the Chief Justice to tell us the same thing she said on January 31st, that the moment that no confidence motion was passed, Cabinet, as a matter of law, ceased to exist?
Can I hold that book for a minute?
By all means.
You see this book? If you don't have men and women that intend to interpret this book with integrity, we are in trouble. This book depends on men of integrity to execute it and interpret it. And if you have people who are going to play games with this book, we are in trouble.
And we talk about the Constitution.
Yes, this is the Constitution.
It's more than just a book.
This is the
Constitution of Guyana.
If we don't have people of integrity, and I think the courts did say that they expect this to be executed with a level of
and
integrity
the political
by
players.
the political players.
Do you get the impression? Again, you've been moving around.
Yes.
You have a governance committee in the Private Sector Commission. You've been hosting meetings. I think you're meeting the Carter Center tomorrow.
We are meeting the Carter Center tomorrow. We are meeting the CARICOM Secretary General tomorrow, because we are actually very concerned about the silence of CARICOM. I must tell you that. We are actually their silence is deafening. Actually, the ABC countries, the US, Canada, and the UK and the EU, have been really trying to work us through this maze, and we are so grateful for the work of the US Ambassador. So very grateful of the work of the Canadian High Commission and the British High Commission and the European representative here in Guyana. We are very concerned when we look at the OAS and we look at CARICOM. The deafening silence, and all we are saying is maybe the time is here now to have a broker, to have somebody sit down and look at this and say, guys, let's get this over with. The no confidence motion is not it's not a fall of the government, because the government could go back to elections and win back their mandate.
Absolutely. And
so I don't understand why they're treating it as if it is the end of the government. It is the end. It just means you go back to the people, and if you're doing as good as you think you're doing, the people will re-elect you. This is the essence of democracy. And
not only the essence of democracy, this particular article was supported 100% by all the political players.
Correct.
Including the government.
Correct. And so it is actually quite frightening that we are taking this long to comply with what is very clear. And there we keep making all the maneuvers that are going on. And what particularly concerns me more than anything else now, because when we were in the front of the court interpreting the Constitution for some basic things that really didn't need judicial
we wasted
interpretation.
A lot of time.
But you know what is bothering me now? The Elections Commission of Guyana. And I have been actually involved in the Elections Commission for about 15 years, Chris. I have been an accredited observer. I've been in there. And by the way, even as we speak, I want to say that the news that we got that Loingfield is in hospital is very sad. And he's my friend, he's my colleague. He and I was in the army together, and I consider him a friend. And I'm very sad to hear that he's in the hospital not well. But I will tell you, Loingfield is an expert on GCOM. GCOM was one of the most efficient organizations in the history of this country. But when you think about it, if something happened in one of our borders and the president calls the army and deploy them, and they say, "Oh, we can't go. Sorry about that. We have to fix our guns, or we have to find the bullets, or we don't have fuel in the vehicle." Could you imagine an army that works like that? We're an army that is supposed to be always on the ready, or you call the fire service to out a fire, and the fire service don't have water. And so when you have a GCOM that was meant to be always ready to deliver elections in 90 days in this country, and from 2008, that was never meant to be a question. When that system was transformed to the biometrics, when every voter that was put on the NRR had all their biometrics captured into that NRR, and that entire system was so secure, the integrity was unquestioned. And let me tell you, we had a meeting with the chairman of GCOM. I took 13 private sector leaders and met with the chairman of GCOM, and we had Loingfield there and the PRO. And that meeting was actually quite an interesting meeting, because at that meeting, Loingfield announced to the entire body in front of the chairman that the NRR is not bloated, that the integrity of the NRR is not compromised.
Why do you think the president said that then?
I am baffled. When I said to Lowenfield, so where did the president get this thing that there are 200,000 people improperly inserted on the NRR? Lowenfield said he don't know. He never said so. He don't believe that. The NRR is secure from day one when it was being built in 2008. The NRR is secure. The integrity is intact. And we said to Lowenfield, so why then did you agree to go to house registration? Because house registration essentially means that you're destroying this NRR. Why would you want to destroy NRR that is totally intact, the integrity is intact, and not bloated? He said if the records of the GCOM will show that he gave one advice, and that the 3 government commissioners and the chairman at the time voted for the house registration. This was not a secret. This was a public meeting. It was a meeting by the private sector commission with our leaders, and we were actually quite encouraged by the chairman's posturing, and even Lowenfield as we walked these things through. So I said to him, Lowenfield, because I know Lowenfield know the GCOM systems. I know the GCOM systems, how efficient it was. I saw the GCOM system deliver an election in 2015, which the opposition won.
2011,
And 2011, 2015, 2016, and 2018. Lowenfield ran those elections like clockwork. They were the best elections run in the history of this country in terms of efficiencies. And now to see this charade, and it is, to me, it is sad, because when I could have been proud of GCOM, and actually there was an international study that was done on electoral systems around the world, and they graded electoral systems, and I will get the source for you. They graded the Guyana electoral system in the last 15 years at a 95%. There are other countries, other Western countries, that the electoral systems were way down in the 60s and the 50s. Our electoral system, under Lowenfield's management and Swordsbody, was up in the 90s. I saw this system and I was so impressed with the way GCOM would respond. To see what is happening now is completely sad and disgraceful.
Gerry, you probably know, earlier today, the Court of Session in Scotland ruled against the Prime Minister trying to prorogue the House of Commons. And this is one of the things Lord Doherty said. Sorry, the House judges disagreed with the judge in the early case, and said that it was a tactic to frustrate Parliament than a legitimate use of power in the case of Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the UK. Interestingly enough, and contrastingly, Boris Johnson is saying, I want to go to elections. I'm proroguing. In our case, Parliament has spoken, the courts have spoken, and the government said we're not going to elections. What does that say about our democracy and our democratic culture?
It's under threat. It's under threat. And we need to pull it back. We need to pull it back to where it was. Our democracy was alive and well. We need to put it back. We don't want people to keep saying to me, and they're saying to the nation all the time, oh yes, we will obey the rule of law. Oh yes, we want election at the earliest possible time. But every single thing you're doing, every single day, is stretching these timelines. Now I'm getting a report that people are saying elections next year. I mean, what are we doing? What is this? Where's the obedience of this book? Where is it? I mean, how could we sit there and say, okay, you know what, you may get away with doing that now. You may get away with doing that now, but people are not foolish. To do this, it borders on dishonesty.
And
it borders on dishonesty.
I come back to this issue of the governance and the threat to democracy as a resource scarce. Here it is, we are on the cusp of benefiting from one of the greatest discoveries. We missed El Dorado. Walter Raleigh did not find cities paved with gold. But here we are, under the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, part of our continental shelf, just having discovered oil. And here it confronts us forced soil will take place. If this continues, forced soil will take place with a government that is unlawful.
You know, I sat in Parliament. I was there. The private sector sent me there as an observer during the night of the no confidence motion. I saw it happen, and I saw Bar Jagdeo got up and reach across the divide and said, "Let us put this behind us.
When you went and spoke with Harman.
Let us work publicly in the chambers."
Yes.
And he said, "I want to work together. Let us together join forces, work together, because what is before us, we could together work to bring benefit to all Guyanese." I was elated at that point in time. It didn't matter who was going to win the elections as a result of this no confidence motion, but what Jagdeo said to the assembly that night, whatever happens, let's work together. And I felt our democracy was alive and well, you know. And then I saw what unfold days after. But it is quite frightening, and it's sad that we are not. All we are doing is giving mouth support to this constitution, but we are not walking the walk.
Well, we have another consequence to all of this. Our representatives, the Chapter 2 of the Constitution, principles and bases of the political, economic and social system. Sovereignty belongs to the people who exercise it through their representatives and the democratic organs established by or under this Constitution. And our Parliament is effectively shut down. We have shut down democracy. We've shut down sovereignty of the people. Now, I don't think, and I certainly don't want to put you in the spot. The private sector has taken powerful positions on matters since December 21. You have taken up the mantle of the chairmanship in one of the most difficult conditions this country has ever faced. How is this affecting you personally?
Well, a friend of mine said to me, "Gerry, aren't you afraid? Aren't you?" And I said, "Afraid of what?" I am not fearful because I don't believe I have nothing to fear from my government. People think that if you exercise your freedom of speech or give your opinion that you need to be fearful. I don't believe I live in a country where I need to be fearful. People say, "Oh, Gerry, they're going to affect your operations at the airport. They're going to affect the regulators." And I don't believe that. I don't believe that we, and I hope not, that we are in an atmosphere of a government I need to be afraid of. I believe that freedom of speech and opinions must be all welcome on the table.
But freedom of speech includes the freedom to vote in the National Assembly.
And correct.
And that has been subverted. It has been.
Yes. And I am hoping that good sense will prevail. Let me tell you, I know President Granger. I worked with President Granger in the Army, and I have tremendous respect for President Granger. And he's always command us and command the troops of the GDF when he had the opportunity with a lot of integrity. And I hope that President Granger, that integrity, that leadership will take the forefront now and take us back to a place where we are all confident that tomorrow is going to be a better place, not just economically, but in terms of our democracy, of the rule of law, compliance with rule of law. Without the rule of law, governments, if you look at the study you got there, governments are powerful, Chris. And if you do not have the rule of law to corral government and the constitution to make sure, and the courts, and we need the courts to be independent and strong, so the courts could basically rule and people must respect the courts.
Is that happening now?
Well, we were, I don't even know who's Dipcon. I don't even know this. I don't know the details of it. The only thing I know is that the court ruled that the government of Guyana must pay that contractor. That is the only thing I know. And I know, if the court says so, then that is what you do.
And the court found Jordan, the Minister of Finance, in contempt, and the President decides, "Oh, I am pardoning you." Isn't that an abuse of the Constitution?
I'm sorry that the Minister of Finance had to be a subject and a target of this whole thing.
All he had to do was
all I'm
pay.
saying,
All he had to do was
I'm
pay.
saying the answer to that is not to the president to the president. All they had to do is pay, and then that goes away. I mean, to defy the court and say I don't agree with the court. If you had arguments about this court case, about the right or wrong, do it in the court.
But it had passed through the entire court system.
Well,
it had gone through to the CCJ.
But that is frightening. That is frightening. If a government could actually so blatantly disobey the rule of law and the court orders, it bothers me as a businessman. It really bothers me as a businessman and as a citizen of Guyana. I don't want to live in a country where the government flouts the rule of law and flouts the constitution. It is frightening. Now, you know, we could get into a quarrel back and forth and who said what, but the facts, we all could have our opinions. The facts is a different matter, and the fact says that the court order is not being obeyed.
Let me, we got about 2.5 minutes to go. We've just heard a couple days ago that Sarah has gone to court against one of our major national banks and against a private sector entity. Now, Sarah is itself the subject of a court challenge about its legitimacy. What does that do to the confidence of the private sector?
And this matter was being discussed, and I'll tell you, it is when you go, GBTI Bank is an iconic building in the city today, and I would say even if I had to give them the land free to do the kind of investment they did, it's like Movietongue. I would give Movietongue that land free to spend $30 million to put up a building and do what they're doing. So to foster and enhance investor confidence and to help investors, what Queen's Atlantic did in that facility was amazing. You had to go there to see the bush, the vagrants that live there, the asbestos in the walls, and when you see that facility today, and you will now go after those investors that took the risk to refurbish that place and build it back the way it is and build that bank and make that investment in the ground of Guyana, and then we are dragging them through the courts like this. It's actually quite disturbing, and I'll tell you what, other investors coming along, and if you bring them from Trinidad, or you bring the investors from Barbados, or you bring them from Jamaica, eventually they will learn about this, and it will frighten investors.
And people will be afraid of entering into deals with any government, because if this gets passed, we have problems. But I also raise the issue, Gerry, about Sarah itself being challenged on constitutional grounds.
Well, there seems
and
to
the
be...
court, unfortunately...
They seem to be in a hurry to do this thing, and I don't know why they seem to be in a hurry to attack these investors that create jobs. This is not even a promise. This is a promise delivered. This is not even be saying this is what we will do. And these people have actually delivered. They delivered an iconic building. They developed that land there in front of the Pegasus to amazing international standards. That is an iconic building. To go and attack those people today is shameful.
And to tell a correspondent bank, an American correspondent bank, for example, that this bank you're dealing with in Guyana has engaged in shady deals.
No. This is not what we want. And you know, when I talk about leaders who know how things work, we need leaders who understand that is not how things work.
Gerry, I want to thank you, Captain Gerry Gouveia. I want to thank you very much for another fruitful hour on Plain Talk. Let's see what happens over the next week, September the 18th, to drop that date for the effecting of the decision of the no confidence motion on December 21. I want to thank you, viewers, thank you, operators, and wish you all a very good night until I see you next week.